And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
I showed you that because that's, to me, is just a remarkable impression of when you first open the box and you see what you get with this three-dimensional board. Timber Tom is a basically self-produced game, which just, you can see, is a labor of love. It's a very well-produced game. It's not a very deep game. It's basically a race game in which players are going from trying to get to different treasures on different mountains. There's a dose of randomness if you want. You can take it out if you don't like it. It's maybe a bit too bland for hardcore gamers, but for families, this is one that they'll enjoy. They'll enjoy probably 50% because of how much fun it is to play with the pieces in the game and how well the theme fits in, but it also is a very decent race-style game. Let's take a closer look at how the game plays. Bear in mind that what I'm showing you is a 2008 version of the game. There may be some updates and changes in 2009. I know there was a few rule changes. Some of those I'll actually be talking about in my review. But this is what each player gets at the beginning of the game. You have your own little supply area. You have 3 axes and a chainsaw. You have 2 Hello Flight tokens and 2 Hello Radio tokens that you'll be able to use during the course of the game. And you have 3 supply packs. Then you have room here for treasures. As you go to different peaks, you'll place treasures in those. Now, the game is determined by whoever gets all 4 treasures first. That's actually a fairly long game. You can play 2 or 3. I would suggest that for most people 2 will actually be good enough. And if you want a decent sized game, 3, I would usually not play 4 because the game might start getting a little bit long. Now, what players are going to be doing is they're going to be starting on the board, and they'll be starting here in the base camp with their explorers, and they're going to be moving, trying to get to the peaks where they can pick up the gold. There's 4 different peaks in the different corners of the board, and players will be moving again from the base camp. Now, when you move a player on your turn, you start with a certain amount that you can move. Now, I don't know if the camera is going to show a pretty good angle of this, but each area of land has movement printed on it. Let's see if we can focus up there. There we go. If this area right here, this plateau, the movement that you move there is 6 spaces exactly. You can see up there on the next level that it's 5 spaces exactly, and when we move over, 4 spaces. There's no number on some areas, like on the snow peaks, or on the yellow floodlands in the bottom. On those areas, you will, instead of moving a specific amount, at that point, you will roll a die. Now, this die has 3, 4, and 5 on it. That's all it has. So there's a little bit of randomness in how you move. So the first thing you do is move. So I look here, and my base camp is started in 6, and so I can move 6 spaces. So I start from here, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, after I move, I then look at the area where I moved to, and it shows, next to the number of movement, how many trees I can plant. Now, when you plant trees, you can pretty much plant them anywhere except floodlands and on the snow peaks. And what you're going to usually try to do is, if someone else is going for a certain spot, I can stop them by planting trees. Now, I can't plant trees on these little helipads or on the cabins either, but I can plant trees. Now, you're not allowed to completely surround somebody with trees, but you can plant trees so that it really makes their life miserable. Now, when a player moves, they have the option of using their axe to chop down a tree, and the chainsaw chops down 2 trees, but once they use those are gone. Now, there's a few spots on the board as players move to them of interest. One of those are the supply cabins. These supply cabins here Those allow a player to replenish all their axes. Not the chainsaw, though. And the supply cabinets up near the top, they allow you to replenish your supply packs. Now, why do you need these supply packs, these barrels? Well, they can be used for 3 different things. They can be used to move you an extra space, which is kind of helpful because sometimes you're trying to land on something by exact movement. And when you only can move 6, or you have to move exactly 6, moving an extra space is helpful. You also can use these to cross the river. There's certain spaces on the board where there's a canoe, and the only way to get across is by using up one of your supply packs. And then finally, whenever you go onto a peak, you must have a supply pack. So, going to these cabins and refilling your supply packs is necessary because you only have 3 of them. You'll probably end up using them over the course of the game. Then there's helipads. These areas let you use the heliflight. You can fly from one of them to another. Very important, very useful. You only have 2 of these heliflight tokens, though. The only way to replenish your heliflight tokens is by going back to the base camp, which is really out of your way. And then finally, there are what we call hotspots. See those little areas that are different colors than the rest? Those are radio hotspots. When you're on those, you can use the helo radio and fly from those to the nearest cabin. It's a good way to get exactly to a cabin. It's a good way to maneuver on the same mountain. Then there's one more element to the game, and that's whenever you land up on the peak, you are allowed to draw a card. Whenever you land in the flood zones, you may draw a card, or whenever you land on a radio hotspot, you may draw a card. These cards are going to show different things. For example, this one here lets you go 1 space further for every axe that you hold. Remove any trees that may block your trail. And then you plant 3 trees. Some of them are good, but some of them, like for example this one, Broken Bridge. If you're on any bridge, you lose 1 supply pack. So you have to be careful when you draw these. Sometimes they're helpful to you, but sometimes they're not. Here's a hungry young bear. You lose 1 supply pack. Now, some people who might not like randomness can simply take the pack of cards out of the game. And that's basically how the game works as players are moving, and the board becomes really neat as you just start loading up and you'll see trees sprouting all over the place, and it really gives a neat 3-dimensional feel. The supply packs being those little plastic barrels, that's a neat idea. But as the game progresses, it just gets more and more interesting as players have to maneuver around these trees as their axes and chainsaw supplies dwindle. So that's pretty much the game itself. It's a racing game. You're trying to get up onto each peak, grab the treasure from that peak, and go back down. You use trees to mess other people over so there's interaction between the players. You try to find the best paths using those helipads and the other movements that you have to try and get the best, to move to the best spots that you can, moving across the board. If you're playing for several peaks, you have to figure out which peak will I get last, which one will I get first. Can I use other players to move farther because you can just jump over another player if they're in your way, or maybe I should avoid them because if we're both in the same area, the other player will put trees around both of us. So it's an interesting game, and it's a lot of fun. Again, if you play with all 4 peaks, it might go on a little long for what it is, and some people are going to find it simplistic. You just move, plant trees around other people. But man, it's really neat looking, and kids are going to love this game. It's very simple as they move their piece around the board. Not to mention, because it's a 3-dimensional board, shaking the table isn't going to do anything to it, and so that's a pretty neat factor in and of itself. Good game, amazing components, definitely one that you should look into trying out.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.